We never know where life will lead us or what may hinder us along the way. But while every day can feel like one big question mark, it doesn't have to. With the right insights, strategies, and solutions from Western and Southern Financial Group, together we can look ahead to leave the unknown behind.
I mean, what's Pro Football Focus doing? Last week they had Brady. This week they got Brady.
We're literally doing it differently from everybody else.
As a matter of fact, moving forward from this point on, I will not make reference to PFF.
Ready to get into it?
Yeah.
All right. We're going team by team. I would be very careful about slinging stone. Am I going to get sued?
We got legal on this?
I like football season, all the things that go with it.
All right, welcome into the PFF NFL podcast. No Steve here, Sam Monson taking over as host. So we brought in Mike Renner, straight from sunny Florida, Mike.
I am. It's fantastic down here. I don't miss Cincinnati one bit, the weather at least.
I don't know what you're talking about. It was 20 degrees the other morning when I was walking the dog, and then it got all the way up to 40. Like, this is glorious springtime weather.
Balmy Cincinnati, or sunny Cincinnati, as Austin Gale used to say.
Yeah. So today we're going to continue our draft talk post NFL free agency. Last week we're going to start talking about some offensive tackles, big guys, the trenches. We're going to talk about build a perfect offensive tackle prospect like we've been doing at a bunch of other positions. We're going to talk about Peter Skoronski and arm length, because that's something that people get obsessed with around this kind of time. We're going to talk about Dawand Jones and the giant offensive tackles that are kicking around the NFL, and maybe a little bit about sort of one-dimensional type of players, pass blockers, run blockers, that kind of thing. But before we get into it, just enough time to tell people that the PFF NFL podcast is sponsored by Western and Southern Financial Group. They're the people that provide this glorious studio. Can't see the plaque on the wall, but you can see the little Western and Southern mug down here. While you focus on your roster moves, Western and Southern helps advance your money moves. Buying your first home, planning to start a family, wondering how to make your money grow. Western and Southern's playbook of life insurance, investment, and retirement solutions helps you rest assured on game day. Team up to understand needs and address goals with a game plan built just for you. Get started at westernsouthern.com/PFF. That's westernsouthern.com/PFF. All right, Mike, let's start off with how good a group is this in terms of offensive tackles in the draft this year?
I was initially sour on this tackle class going in. And I think it's because watching the top guys, I don't think I saw anyone in the kind of that special tier. Like going back a few years to the, Penei Sewell, Rashawn Slater class, the year before that, with Wirfs and Andrew Thomas. I don't think I'd put any of those guys in that tier. But there's a pretty big I'd probably tier it up into two different tiers in this offensive tackle class. But there's a pretty big second tier that is kind of like a fringe day one, more likely than not. Like if it was a super good tackle class, you'd like them more as like second rounders. But I do think that there's a pretty deep second tier to where there's a lot of options, at least, to develop in this offensive tackle class. So if you're in need of one, I suggest taking one in the top 50 picks. But there should be talent available for you in this class. It's not completely bereft.
Yeah, it seems like certainly when you're looking at the sort of top tackles, there's nobody that fits into that surefire guy you love category, but there should be a lot of starters from day one, day one starters and day one starters taken on day one. Like guys are going to go in first because you need starting offensive tackle. That's where they're going to go.
Yes, 100% agree. So comparing it just to last year's class where you had the PFF board had Charles Cross, Ike Ekwonu, Evan Neal as OTs 1, 2, 3. I'm not sure any of these guys cracked into that range for me in terms of how good I thought those guys were as prospects. The one guy I could put in that tier is Peter Skoronski, but we're going to talk about him probably a little later, in that he's a little different in his projection and just what he brings to the table. But then kind of, I think the second tier of this year's tackle class is a lot bigger than last year's. Because last year we went from them to Bernard Raymond, Tyler Smith, Trevor Penning. That was kind of like it for the guys who felt good about as fringe or first rounders in that realm. And then after that, it was guys where it's like, back end of the second, late day two. I think this year there's like 4 guys I would put in that back end of the first into the second round conversation.
All right, so let's start off doing this little exercise that we've done for a few other positions. We're going to build the perfect offensive tackle prospect. We're going to start off with what that looks like from an NFL player perspective, and then you're going to give us what that looks like from the guys in this draft class. So we break the position down into a bunch of different traits or categories or whatever that we're looking at. Offensive tackle, you've come up with just the 4 categories this time. So we've got play strength, mirroring, the ability to kind of stay opposite the defensive lineman trying to get past you, hand usage, and then the best on the move or out in space. So for the NFL, play strength has got to be Trent Williams. That dude is just an absolute freak show when it comes to being more powerful than the guy he's trying to block. Mirroring, I think we've got either David Bakhtiari, who has been probably the best guy at that over his NFL career, or Rashawn Slater, if we've decided that, David Bakhtiari's knee is a chronic problem that's probably going to take him out of that conversation going forward. Hand usage, I think Lane Johnson at right tackle for the Eagles is exceptional with his punch and how he uses his hands. And then best in the move right in space. Seems weird for a guy that's as freaking strong as he is, but Trent Williams on the move in space is an absolute nightmare. It's like getting hit by a Mack truck if you're a linebacker or a defensive back trying to stop him. So that, I think, is the NFL version of the perfect offensive tackle. What about the draft class, Mike?
Yeah, there's a reason why Trent Williams is a unicorn, right? Why, the highest grade ever. It's because you don't see guys with that combination too often, and I don't see one in this class also. But play strength-wise, this was probably the most hotly debated one, is play strength in this draft class, because there's a number of guys in this tackle class I think that are plus play strength, that are high level in that regard, whether it's Broderick Jones from Georgia, whether it's Dawand Jones from Ohio State, and that's just, you're not going through that guy. But the one who I think takes the cake is Darnell Wright from Tennessee. Obviously, he's a little older than the other guys. He's a 4th year, 4 years of starting at Tennessee. But you see him, and everyone brings up the game against Willie Anderson because you want to see a guy and how he fares against top competition. You see him in that game, and one of the few guys who could really sit down and drop anchor against Willie Anderson's bull rush. And that's, that's something you need to see. That's something that separates kind of the man from the boys in the tackle position, that a lot of NFL evaluators, if you don't have that ability to you, if you can't anchor against the bull rush, you legitimately just won't see the field in the NFL because they'll bull rush you every single time then. The power, if you can't stand up to NFL power, you'll see it every single play, and you'll lose every single play because you have no recourse. So to me, Darnell Wright, you watch his tape, you watch his upper body strength, and it's just high-end NFL stuff. And so I think he takes the cake in that regard. All
right. Mirroring,
this one is Peter Skoronski, right? He is. This is why, with his 32.25-inch T-Rex arms, that he's still considered PFF's OT1 in this draft class. I just think his ability to match and mirror speed is exactly what you want to block the Von Millers of the world in the NFL. And truthfully, from last year to this year, his play strength concerns shored up entirely. Went from sophomore to junior. So I'm not worried about that either. He is strong and able to mirror NFL caliber edge rushers, which is why I still feel like even with those undersized arms, I think he's going to be a player in the NFL.
And you've got him as an option for hand usage as well. And those two things put together, we'll talk about that in a little bit, but those are the things you need if you're going to have those little stumpy T-Rex arms.
Yeah, he uses his hands probably as well or better than anyone, but they're 32.25 inches. There's only so much you can do with them. That's why I think Dawand Jones also deserves some love for the hand usage, because maybe he's not as consistent snap to snap as a Peter Skoronski with them. But when they're 36 and 3/8 inches and you're as strong as Dawand Jones is, all it takes is one well-placed mitt and he stops edge rushers before they start. So he's fantastic at kind of getting that initial contact, using that length. I think we talked about the combine that, like, a lot of guys with arms, 35.5 inches or longer, those really long, obscenely long arms, they just don't know how to use them, and they're almost a detriment because they're late to punches a lot. They're too long. They just can't time it up. With Dawand Jones, it is the opposite. He is technically very sound, and that hand usage is why I still feel like even at his insane size with mediocre movement skills by tackle standards, I still think he's going to get the job done in the league.
Well, he's one of the few people who has arms that length and they're still in proportion to the rest of him. Like, all of him is that size.
That helps.
Whereas other guys that have freaky long arms, they're out of proportion to the rest of their body. Like, they're big people, but they're not 36-inch arms big, and maybe that's part of the reason why they lose control.
That's actually a great point. I like that take.
What about the best in the move or best on the move or out in space?
I'm kind of cheating with this one because, again, this would be Peter Skoronski's. Like, he is outside of the arm length. Like, Skoronski can move, he can mirror, he can anchor. Like, Skoronski is a damn good offensive line prospect, which is why you're seeing a lot of people just being like, yeah, he's going to be a top 10 pick. Maybe the NFL sees him as guard, but he's just going to be a top 10 pick because he's in that kind of realm of offensive line prospect. But the one I'm kind of cheating here because he's probably going to move to the interior, but he's so damn good out in space. I just got to give him some love. It's Cody Mauch, the North Dakota State offensive tackle. And again, he is not only, has the arm length concerns, but he has the play strength concerns if you're sticking him at tackle. I do think wholesale he's going to be a guard or center in the NFL. But my Lord, when you see him pull out to the edge, when you see him climb to the second level, he is a linebacker's worst nightmare, this guy, with his ability to just track you down. And he's a former tight end, gained 80 pounds to play offensive tackle over the course of his 6 years at North Dakota State, and he still moves like one. So, yeah, Cody Mauch, that's a guy I want if I'm any sort of wide zone, any sort of wide run scheme heavy that's really getting our guys out in space, out in the move. Cody Mauch's going to be a terror in that kind of scheme.
All right, so that's building our perfect offensive tackle prospect from this year's group. That brings us on to Peter Skoronski. This is who we've got to talk about now because he's your offensive tackle number one. And as we just heard, I mean, he's ticking most of the boxes we want from our perfect prospect in this draft. He's, really high up in terms of mirroring, his hand usage, moving in space as well. He's got everything except the arms. And the problem he's got is that the arms are really on the extreme end of small. Even guys who you can think of in the past who have sort of had that relatively short arm thing and succeeded, most of those guys have longer arms. If you get it up, even if you just bump it to 33 inches, that brings in guys like Rashawn Slater or Jared Veldheer, like quality left tackles that have had success in the NFL. As soon as you get below 33, you start to run really low on names of successful guys really quickly. And he's 32 and a quarter.
So guys with 32 and a half inches that played snaps last year at tackle in the NFL. You have Jackson Carman, the Cincinnati Bengals, and that was obviously at a backup role. Right. He started his career at guard. You have Patrick McCarry for the Ravens, and you have Braden Smith for the Indianapolis Colts. That's it. That's the full list. Guys with 32 and a half. And Carman, I believe, is for 32 and a half. McCarry's were shorter. Braden Smith's the one guy where it's like, that's your hope, right? He has 32 and a quarter inch arms, the exact same as Peter Skoronski. And he's been great, right? This past, he's been probably a top 5 to 10 right tackle. If you get Braden Smith's career, that's a first round pick every day, twice on Sundays. That you're paying, a top 15 pick for a guy like Braden Smith and how productive he's been at tackle position. So I think the fact that we've seen it makes you a little hopeful. Now, can he reach the ceiling that some of these other guys can't? Is it going to limit him in ways? Will he still probably struggle with pure power rushers, longer guys, the Nick Bosa's of the world who really come at you with play strength and use that length, use that first contact advantage? I think so. I don't foresee him ever turning into what Trent Williams looks like, right?
Right.
But I do think that the fact that we know there's a guy doing it at a high level with our own length, I wouldn't be too afraid of it. And then if it doesn't work out, I think you'll be an elite guard. So I do think that all those put together, the safeness of him compared to the rest of this class is why I'd still go to bat for him as OT1.
That last point, I think, is really interesting because when I started to look at the arm length thing and sort of looking for comps and guys that have played well over a period of time, two names that jumped out to me when you extend the parameters a little bit are two guys who had 32 and a half inch arms for one of them and then 32 and 7/8 for the other, each of whom I think could have been pretty high quality offensive tackles, but each of whom got kicked inside to guard and became arguably the best player in the NFL at their position. Number one is Marshall Yanda, 32.5. And then the other one is Zach Martin, 32 and 7/8. Both of those guys have shown in their NFL career that they can play offensive tackle. Yanda, yes, I think could have been a Pro Bowl, All-Pro right tackle. Zach Martin, maybe not that good, but he's shown he can go out and play right tackle and be fine. So those are two interesting names because both of those guys effectively got kicked inside to guard. Martin was never even a question, and Yanda got moved inside relatively quickly. But I think each of them showed that they probably could have been fine at right tackle. And if that is the kind of career path for Skoronski or the debate the teams are facing, I think that becomes an interesting discussion of, well, which is better? Like, and Quentin Nelson is another guy that sort of muddies this as well. If you're going to be that good at guard, is it worth you starting off at tackle and seeing if you can be decent? Because we've always sort of taken the approach of, let the guy fail a tackle first because it's a more valuable position. But guys like Quentin Nelson have shown, and I suspect Yanda and Martin would show the same thing, that if you're going to be that freaking good at guard, you are more valuable than, a reasonable right tackle. Like, you would need to be a very good offensive tackle for it to still be worth keeping him out there and seeing if you can do that.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you there that they have to be legitimately, below at legitimately a problem at tackle before I'm switching him to guard, just because of the ease of which you can find one and not the other. You can go find competency at guard. You just cannot find that at tackle very easily. And I will say this, Marshall Yanda, if that's like what you're getting, he had an 85.5 overall grade at tackle in his career.
Right.
Like, he was legitimately, like you said, a good tackle. And I think Zach Martin wasn't to that degree, but was competent there. So it's limiting, yes, but I think you are cutting yourself off from a super valuable, and in my opinion, high floor player if you're just throwing Peter Skoronski out of this tackle class because of his arm.
Yeah, I mean, Yanda is the kind of jackpot scenario where obviously he was arguably the best guard of his generation during his NFL career, but also had enough time at tackle where he proved he could have been a very good right tackle if the Ravens wanted to play him there instead. Like, if that was, that's probably the ceiling of what you can expect for anybody that's in this bucket of undersized arms or concerning arm length. This is also where we have to remind people that you're going to find places that say that Joe Thomas had 32-something inch arms, but when Joe Thomas was on the podcast, he explained that measurement was a mistake, and actually his arms are significantly longer than that and far more, prototypical left tackle numbers. So sadly, what was the best data point to make this argument, if you want to go to bat for a short arm guy for like a decade, it turns out is just bullshit.
Yeah, hard to see a 6'7" guy having that short arms.
Unless you're Aiden Hutchinson.
Would have been cool. Would have been cool if he did.
Yeah, unless you're Aiden Hutchinson, where somehow his arms are that stumpy.
He's got a weird build.
Incredible. Weird.
Actually, there's a few over the years who had really weird, really oddly short arms at that size. There's a guy in this year's class who, Gervon Dexter, got 32.25-inch arms at 6'6".
The Aiden Hutchinson and me have the same length arms, and he's 8 inches taller than I am. It's absurd. That shouldn't be possible. What was I going to say? So for Skoronski, we think he has the ability to play left tackle. There are plays on his tape where you do see the arm length thing show up, like guys get into his chest, and he just flails. Like, he just can't, you know what I mean? You can't reset once that happens. Once a guy gets one arm into your chest and he's longer than you are, you're basically a passenger at that point. And all the footwork, all the play strength, all the ability to mirror in the world means nothing because you have no leverage point.
Yeah. You saw that there's reps against like Lucas Van Ness that are like the concerning reps, right? Where it's like Lucas Van Ness, 6'5", 270, 34-inch arms. That's kind of prototypical. That's what you'll see at the NFL you're worried about. And you saw him just Van Ness bowl him over a couple times in their matchup. So you just may not get the super high end because there are legitimate weaknesses or legitimate ways you can attack a short arm tackle. But I will say this, 3 years of starting at left tackle. I think one of the biggest things in this tackle class especially at the top, is inexperience. You have Paris Johnson, the Ohio State tackle, with 1 year starting at left tackle. You have Broderick Jones from Georgia, 1 full year as a starter at left tackle. Those are kind of 1-2 on a lot of people's boards. And so if I'm looking and I'm, a top 12 team, I'm someone like, whether it's like the Raiders or someone like the Titans who's like, I need that help right now. My offensive line stinks. I need someone to come in and be good. I think you're looking at this tackle class and you're saying Peter Skoronski can do that. Whereas these other guys, maybe the transition's a little steeper.
The other thing I'll say, and I don't know if this means anything beyond just, circumstance, but when you turned on the combine, when you watched him move around and the Lycra crap that they had on, he just looks like a guard. Like if you freeze framed the picture of the dude and said, where does this guy play in the NFL? You would say offensive guard. You wouldn't say tackle. Like he's got that kind of body type. So it's not just, I don't think, the short arm thing. Like if you just take a look at him, you go, that guy's definitely a guard at the next level. So I think there's a pretty high chance that a team drafts him and he ends up playing guard relatively quickly. Like maybe they have an acute need of tackle, and that's where he plays in a pinch year one. But like he feels to me like he's going to be a long-term guard.
I hope not. I hope he gets a shot. Hope you get a shot, Peter.
So from one end of the scale to the other, in terms of absolute freak size, we've got Dawand Jones, this monstrous offensive tackle from Ohio State. And again, you go to the combine, they had the simulcast thing. They show Rich Eisen running against a bunch of people. By the way, Dawand Jones, one of the few people at the combine that is still officially slower than I am in jeans and sneakers. So I've got that going for me. Now, he outweighs me by 200 pounds, so it's not all sunshine, but I can still outrun him, just. So when they had the simulcast of him running against Mekhi Becton, who's 6'7", 360 or something like that, he made Mekhi Becton look small. That is not easy to do. Like, he looked like a giant chasing down Mekhi Becton on that simulcast thing. Now, Mekhi Becton ran away from him, so there's that. But we are talking about one of the largest tackles we've seen come into the draft ever.
Yes. I mean, so Daniel Falele last year was talked about as one of the biggest OTs, NFL history.
Right.
But his was more weight. Like, he was thick throughout his frame. Dawand Jones is legitimately built larger even than Falele. Like, he has longer arms, broader shoulders. That guy is enormous. Like, he looks like he belongs on a basketball court. Not, that's the type of build that plays center in the NBA usually, and not offensive tackle in the NFL. So he's just absolutely enormous. And so when you're evaluating, just him compared to Skoronski, they're playing a different game almost in what they're doing, how they're blocking, how they're pass protecting, just because his foot speed's never going to be elite. He's never going to move the way, Skoronski moves. That's not going to be his game. But I think you see, watching him and then watching guys like Trent Brown, obviously 370-plus pounder, like even Orlando Brown, even though he's not, nearly as big, but does have that massively long, large frame that just, if you can play on balance, if you can play steady and use your hands at a high level, you could still be a very effective offensive tackle in the NFL. As we saw, Orlando Brown just got paid. And I think Dawand Jones' tape compares very favorably even to Orlando Brown's coming out of Oklahoma, and just the consistency you saw from him. And obviously the traits are even freakier in the arm length, in the hand size. Look at those 11 5/8 inches. He gets his mitts on you and the block is over. So I do think he may not be necessarily for everyone, but if I'm a team that's really if you have a mobile quarterback, I keep going back to this with him because, you can't rush a mobile quarterback. You can't get super far upfield. You can't fire off the line. You have to play contain still. If you have to contain rush against Dawand Jones, he's going to eat your lunch. And so if you have a mobile quarterback, he's going to give you massive pockets to step up into. That I think this is a guy you're really going to want. So if it's, I don't know where exactly that's going to fall in the draft. He's definitely going to be kind of like an eye of the beholder type of draft pick where he's going to have a lot more value to one team than he may another team. So with those guys, it's somewhat difficult to project where they come off the board. But I do think if he lands in that kind of situation, he could have an Orlando Brown-esque career path.
Man,
truthfully. Where Orlando Brown was like solid right away. And I think that you could see that from Dawand Jones.
Yeah, absolutely. That's an interesting point that I hadn't thought about before, that if you have a quarterback that's a threat to rush and you already face different types of pass rushes than more statue-like pocket passers, that guy's value goes up because he is going to absolutely stone those players on the edge and eradicate them from the play. The Orlando Brown comp is an interesting one because obviously he just joined the Cincinnati Bengals, was a sort of surprise addition in free agency. But you're right, has been a good player. Not great, but a good player at both right tackle and left tackle now. Is, a huge offensive tackle, is still significantly smaller than Dawand Jones, but also is a guy that, showed that you can succeed. So if on the scale of Daniel Faalele, Orlando Brown, maybe Dawand Jones, you've got guys that were massive, mammoth offensive tackles, didn't necessarily have particularly good movement skills. Obviously, Faalele's were always a concern. Orlando Brown had one of the worst combine performances in NFL history. For him, it didn't matter. Like, he got the chance, played right tackle, was good, wanted to prove he could play left tackle, is still good, and showed that you don't necessarily need the movement skills if you have just enough at everything, else. If you've got just enough movement skills, if you've got just enough technique, just enough hand usage, you're so freaking big that you don't need to be elite for you to be a problem.
I do think offensive tackle specifically, guard, center to a degree, but like the skill aspect of it is so massive. Now, obviously, like you need some like requisite physical traits, but to me, it's very much a skilled position. Go watch Mitchell Schwartz play offensive tackle and try to tell him anything otherwise than that. The way he blocked, the way, the high end tackles block is not just with overpowering physical ability. Now, some guys can, the Trent Williams of the world can, but like you have to be crafty. You have to, again, know how to use your hands and know how to use leverage and know a lot of different skills that basically like kind of get thrown by the wayside a lot, I think, in the draft process, pre-draft process, is that aspect of tackle play. And so when I watched Dawand Jones, I'm like, he has those things. Now, does he have the high end, everything else that that like maybe other guys have at the tackle position? No, but skill gives you a really high floor at the tackle position in the NFL, especially when, again, you have the requisite traits otherwise. And again, I don't think his movement skills are diabolically bad. Like a 5.3, 40-yard dash for a tackle, not good by any means, but that's not into the problem realm of this guy can't move. So when that's the case, Mr. Schwartz ran a 5.45. He ran slower than Dawand Jones did coming out at 50 pounds lighter. So I do think that Dawand Jones is going to be a fun prospect to follow where he goes in the draft and then where he ends up and how he plays in the league.
I think the other thing is, so there are very different natural, quote unquote, body types playing offensive tackle in the NFL, right? There are guys that play offensive tackle at 315 pounds, but really would be walking around at 250 if they didn't have to weigh 315 pounds to play offensive tackle. So effectively, those guys are, much quicker type bodies that are carrying around like 65, 70 extra pounds just to play at the kind of, inertia they need at the NFL level. Then you have guys like Dawand Jones or some of these other guys that are obviously just naturally huge human beings. And I think you sort of see the difference when these guys stop playing, right? And then there's a group of offensive tackles that basically look the same 15 years later, and there's a group of offensive tackles that look like they never played offensive line in their lives, 10 minutes later, because the weight just disappears. So I think there's probably a big difference between like how natural the movement is for a guy that's carrying around 70 extra pounds to a dude that just walks around at this weight and that's who he is. And there's a degree to which, you might not have the foot speed, the sort of nimbleness of these smaller guys, but you aren't also sort of carrying around a bunch of extra weight that doesn't need to be there. Like, this is who you are. So you probably have sufficient movement skills for that size because you're not like out of proportion This is just like you as an athlete. You know what I mean? And if you have like requisite, if you're just a good enough athlete, you're going to be a problem to get around because you're so big.
Yeah, my favorite is with Dawand Jones is watching his high school basketball highlights because that's where you see that it's just like, oh, this guy's just a big fella that can move. You know, like he's just kind of like that guy who probably like he could probably dance, like he probably has all those other like requisite movement skills that just somehow he ended up 6'9", 370 instead of 6 foot 200. But he's just that didn't really change. Again, the proportionality didn't get so out of whack with him getting that big that he, lost some of that coordination.
So another interesting data point for Dawand Jones was the Senior Bowl, because he goes down there and, is a guy that's going to have to answer these kind of questions of, can you have the level of movement skills? Are you technically sound enough to play at this level? And then pretty much dominated at the Senior Bowl, right? Missed some time, had something, was it a calf strain or something came up and had to stop practicing for a bit. But when he was out there, he was basically unstoppable.
Yeah, and that was really, I don't want to say what sold me. I was kind of a fan of his game before, but that it really showed me that he has, answers. Like he's a student of the game who isn't just getting by on his size. He's actually crafty in how he approaches blocks, how he pass protects. So, that was a performance that was kind of a mic drop one day of practice where he really couldn't have, I don't think he lost a rep that entire day. That was really just, he's going up against other NFLers and he looks the part still.
Is there anybody, obviously you're dealing with a fairly small sample size of people that are that large, but is there any comp that you had for him that actually makes sense?
I just said Orlando Brown, just like stylistically, that's what he looks like. That's who he's going to play like. Now, obviously, he's a little bigger than him, but there really is, when you're generational outlier of size, there's not going to be too many guys you can comp him to.
Right. The Orlando Brown thing, though, I think is something that's definitely in his favor. Like, I think it's always good when there is a recent, relatively straight line comp for a guy that is succeeding at what you were trying to do. So that Orlando Brown has been good for a while and just got a big payday from the Bengals as his most obvious comp, it has got to be a good thing for Dawand Jones coming into this draft and sort of showing that, you can still play at a pretty high level being that freaky big.
Yeah, I want to make it clear. I usually don't go for slower-footed off tackles. Like I think the ability to change directions is a premier trait for the tackle position. That is like the starting point you need to have. So Daniel Faalele was outside the 150 on the PFF draft board last year. Like the guys who are usually that big and aren't necessarily skilled, I'm not going to go to bat for. So that's why for Dawand Jones to be 31st in the draft board, he has to have the goods elsewhere. So I would just put that out there that this isn't usually the type of tackle that I think succeeds in the league.
So the other thing I wanted to touch on today is we're in this world now where we appear to have more sort of one-dimensional offensive tackles playing in the NFL than any period that I can remember. On the one end of the scale, you've got guys like Jawan Taylor, who just got a big payday from the Kansas City Chiefs, $20 million a year, who's been a very good pass blocker but had some of the worst run-blocking grades of any offensive tackle in the NFL. And all the way at the other end of the scale, you've got guys like Caleb McGarry, who was an elite run-blocking tackle for the Falcons, with short arms, by the way. But meh as a pass blocker in his best year and much worse than meh in previous years. So how many of the guys in this draft are sort of wildly one-dimensional like that? And is there anything you think that's sort of explaining this divergence or sort of broadening of the spectrum?
I don't think there are. The only guy I'd maybe say is Anton Harrison. Could be Jawan Taylor-esque, the Oklahoma tackle, in that he's exceptional in pass pro. I think I really like him amongst the top tackles in this draft class. It's usually been kind of like a trio at the top. If you look at most boards, that is Skoronski, Paris Johnson, Broderick Jones. I think Anton Harrison, the Oklahoma tackle, deserves to be in that mix. And truthfully, I think Tennessee's Darnell Wright actually deserves to be in a conversation as well. But Harrison kind of gets left out in the cold, whereas I think this guy's a slam dunk first rounder. For that ability in pass protection. Now, he's not as interested in the run game. You don't necessarily see the killer instinct. I don't think that's a necessity by any means, but his ability to utilize his hands, the foot speed, the foot quicks, it truly is all there. So I think he would qualify as one in this draft class that I'm looking at, that maybe never going to be a plus run blocker, but you're still taking him high regardless.
Yeah, I feel instinctively, with no evidence to back this up, that there are going to be very few teams that care that a guy is not particularly good as a run blocker. You know, the Juwan Taylors of the world.
Yeah.
Every NFL team pretty much is going to be buying into that, because pass blocking is more important than run blocking. That's the thing that can get your quarterback killed. That's the thing you want to focus on. And then there's going to be a couple of teams that run very specific offenses that are going to be more interested in guys like Caleb McGarry or Mike McGlinchey, you know, the Bears, the Falcons, like teams that are going to be massively run heavy, that have a quarterback that they believe can escape the pressure if it gets there, and really want to buy into having a dude that's just going to move people at the point of attack.
I think the one I would say that could be in that mold, because usually those guys are like the more athletic, the explosive guys who can get on you quickly and then move you off the line. Usually it's in like wide zone schemes that they really tend to shine, as those guys who are better maybe as run blockers than pass blockers. The guy I'd say in this class is probably Blake Freeland from BYU. Freak athlete. I mean, 37-inch vertical. He had at the combine at like 6'8". Like, he flies off the line of scrimmage. So his run blocking grade last year was like elite, because in a wide zone scheme, he just can wrench out a 3 technique with ease. It is no problem for him, but then really has nothing behind him. Like, he's just shade over 300 at 6'8", which is very skinny. If you're 6'8", you got to be like 315 plus be playing at the NFL, because that's your stick otherwise. And so he's one guy who, in pass protection, his play strength could get exposed, but in the run game could still be an effective blocker.
Yeah, he had a wild combine, not just the 37-inch vertical, but you could see his movement skills anytime they were doing any kind of drills, like the speed, the ability to change direction. He plays like a dude that barely weighs 300 pounds, you know, relative to these other monsters trying to move around. Like, he absolutely had that kind of just impressive performance across the board, except the size, except the weight.
Yeah. And it shows on tape, man. He got dogged at the Senior Bowl in the one-on-ones, just trying to hold up to any sort of power on contact. He just doesn't have it quite yet. But, you know, if you're going to start off with one trait, right, you want the explosiveness, you want the movement skills, the strength, the size, the weight. It can get better with an NFL weight room, with NFL enhancers. But it's but the movement skills are usually difficult to improve.
Well, it's a good point to make, because it's almost kind of counterintuitive to how you would think. Like, the reason you would think you need the weight. Like, people think you want to weigh 315, 320 pounds because you need the size to move people. But actually, you need the size to anchor. Like, you need the body
stop
mass.
Moving people.
Right. You need the body mass just to be able to hunker down and stop being driven backwards. Speed, like inertia, momentum is going to move people, because, like, you know, Freeland, even this dude, we're concerned by the fact that he only weighs 300 pounds. If that dude starts moving in a hurry and 300 pounds hits something, 300 pounds is shifting whatever the hell it hits. Like, it's still a serious amount of weight, but it isn't necessarily stopping the thing that's coming at him at a rapid rate. You know, that, so I think it actually works like the exact opposite of the way that you would imagine that thing works, sort of from a dynamics point of view, and is the reason that, you know, Joe Thomas, arguably the greatest left tackle in NFL history, or one of them, had to turn himself into kind of a fat guy and play at 315 pounds. Like, Joe Thomas now is a shredded 250 or whatever, but had to carry around 60 pounds of extra weight, because you need to be able to squat down and anchor against a dude that weighs 270 and trying to bull rush you.
100%. I mean, that's also like why Jason Kelsey can be one of the best run blockers in the NFL history, right, at the center position, despite being 275, 280s, because it's a leverage battle, far more than a pure weight and like pure how much I can squat battle. It is like so run blocking is a different animal than the anchoring ability, which has been like kind of his biggest weakness, has been anchoring and pass protection if there has been for Kelsey over the course of his career.
Right. If and when those guys are going to struggle, it's when they get isolated one-on-one with a dude that just outweighs them by a ton, and they simply cannot stop that momentum in a straight line backwards. Yeah. Whereas any run block in the world, you have the ability to at least angle it, so you don't necessarily need to drive the guy directly backwards. You can move him on an angle. You can just get your body between him and the ball carrier. Like, it's not the same problem. Like, you're not disadvantaged the same way because you're outweighed by a massive amount against a big dude.
Yeah, how much was Evan Mathis back in the day? Because he was probably like the poster boy for just like, he could move guys off the line of scrimmage, but was like 295, 300 pounds. Like, he was not a big guard by any means, but he was the best run blocking guard that I've at least seen the past decade or so.
He was listed at like 305, but I don't know if that was before he got like shredded and jacked. Like later in his career, he had a six-pack at that kind of size. I'm guessing he wasn't 300 plus pounds at that point. Like, he dropped some. That was probably whatever he showed up at the combine to show people that he could play at this level, and then just decided to get like jacked to his gills and just dominate people by being, an athlete.
Yeah. What a freak.
All right, Mike, I think we've covered the offensive tackles in the draft. We'll be back for another show tomorrow. You won't be, but I'll be back tomorrow for another show. And then you're going to be back on Friday, where we'll probably do another position group and run through some more stuff. Sound good?
Hell yeah. Sounds good.
Michael, thank you for showing up. Thank you all for listening, and we'll be back tomorrow.